Thank you so much for joining Conversations with Cohen. I'm your host, Greg Cohen, office leasing specialist at Cressa. And this podcast is for office tenants to help educate them about all things regarding their office space, from leasing to architecture and everything in between. Whether you're an entrepreneur thinking about your first office or a director of real estate managing a large real estate portfolio, this podcast is for you. I've got an exciting show for you today. My guest is Chris Smith of Cloud9 Smart. We're going to be talking about the office post-COVID and what you can do to keep your team connected to maintain productivity, discuss the work from home experience for you and your team to encourage them to be connected and engaged, and what you can do to make sure your team is involved, whether they are physically in the office or working virtually. If you want to reach me, I'm at Greg Cohen NYC on Instagram. And if you're new to this video series or podcast, hit the subscribe button below so you never miss a future episode. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Chris. If you don't know him, he's the CEO of Cloud9 Smart, which has been around for almost 20 years. They design, install, and engineer technology for the office and for your home. Chris himself has been in technology for almost 20 years, first with Advanced Audio, then with Bowers & Wilkins, moved over to Macintosh Labs, and since 2016 has been with Cloud9. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Happy to be here.
Chris, I'm really excited to have you on today because the workplace is such a hot topic. I keep getting questions from tenants of how do I prepare my space so I can work from home efficiently, but also how do I get prepared for coming back to the office? So I'd love first to get your perspective on how tenants should be thinking about re-entry into the workspace.
We always address the technology within each business specific to that business. And so I think whenever we're looking at a particular tenant, our goal would be to say, can you describe to me how your business functions? And once we understand how your business functions, how your team has business meeting rhythms, whether you're trying to host clients or not, even post-COVID, how many people come into the office as employees, how do they interact with each other? All of that will drive the technology spectrum. So I think we divide generally the bucket into kind of two categories. There's people with existing space, and we need to think about how we're repurposing those spaces. And then there's people who are taking on new space. They could be taking it on because they're growing, shrinking, or it's their very first space. And obviously we want to purposefully design and think about the distancing requirements and the flow of their workspace to meet those needs in a post-COVID environment. So once we kind of understand your approach, whether it's incumbent or new, then we'll start to make adjustments from within each one of those.
Now, you spend a lot of time in conference rooms.
We do.
And, I had a guest a couple of weeks ago who was talking about, we were talking about signage, and we were talking about, while you used to have 12 or 14 people in a conference room, we're now going to need to have signs that say only 4 to 6, right? So, and conference room space has been changing because you've seen much more amenitized buildings because they recognized that conference rooms weren't necessarily being used as much as they were, and maybe it wasn't the best use of the company's money. So how do we think about conference rooms in the new world?
I think in terms of capacity, it's probably a pretty easy equation to say that any room that used to hold X can hold half X, whatever that might be. If it was an 8-person room, it's probably holding 4. If it's 4, it's probably now holding 2 to achieve the 6-foot distancing that we need. The next thought is it could even be less than that, but let's use half as the metric. One of the ideas is that if we need to gather people, we can gather them in conference spaces. They could also be known as huddle rooms or meeting spaces. We might have to have twice the number of those meeting spaces to achieve half the amount of occupancy in each. We might then be digitally linking those spaces together in a virtual room like a Zoom or a GoToMeeting or pick your method, so that we have quiet and dedication of the space, but then commingling of the people to have communication. There's a secondary approach to this, which would be saying we're actually not going to have meeting spaces because it's inefficient or it's not safe or whatever you want to say about it. And instead, we do it entirely digitally. And we do it from a Zoom room, and everybody in the Zoom is happening from their desk or from home. Well, if we start to think about it from that consideration, we need to have pretty isolated desk spaces with quiet and privacy and the ability to do that. That could also be done from places like phone booths or meeting booths. So there's different strategies about how to then link these together as a virtual meeting room. So I think there's different strategies. And I think depending upon the office layout, you might implement different versions or combinations of those versions so that you're not overspending to either reconfigure a space or to have an overly expensive build out of a space.
Now, you mentioned phone booths, and I had an interesting conversation with Mark Benhar of Benhar Office Interiors a few weeks ago. And we were talking about how, in fact, what was such the rage, these phone booths are actually something that's off limits and should be off limits for right now. So when we think about Zoom rooms, right, that seems to be they're the Nike of the conferencing space, it seems like, the teleconferencing space for now. I think it's because many don't know what else exists. So I was hoping maybe you could speak to what those options are, how folks could be thinking about it differently to be able to maybe even work in a greater efficiency than they are, especially because we hear about this Zoom burnout that a lot of people keep talking about.
Yeah, I think this conversation around what we'll call it digital meeting fatigue or Zoom fatigue, it's true. There's this amazing efficiency of being able to back end meetings to meetings to meetings. Where do you find time to eat? Where do you find time to go to the bathroom? Where do you find time to take a 15-minute breather to recollect your thoughts and respond to the meeting you just had? So I think this idea about the fatigue is very real, and it's irrespective of platform. So I think that that's really important. Number two is the conversation about platform. And from this perspective, different companies will have different strategies. Some companies standardize on a strategy, and then when they have different locations, the new location is just inheriting that digital platform. And so I don't look at any one of them and say good, bad, or indifferent. I think it's really about, do you have a common theme? And does everyone in your office understand it? And does everyone cross office, if you have multiple locations, know how to use it? And if that's true, you could be looking at Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams. There's tons of different strategies from the actual, what's called a soft codec. That's actually the name of the tool that you're using. And then there's a difference between the hardware that you're using to implement that. Like right now, I'm using, quite simply, a laptop running Zoom. But I could be sitting in a huddle room or a conference room using Zoom, but with a great piece of technology behind it. So really, it's about understanding what the needs are and the best method for that. Then there's going to be inherent limitations in some of this. Some of the limitations will be about the number of accounts you need, the cost of those accounts. Is it included with a software tool you already use? So for instance, if you're running Microsoft Office 365, which is a cloud-based service for your email and other tools, you probably already have access to Microsoft Teams, which gives you a digital conferencing solution. So I may not need to then spend more money on Zoom or something like that. If I'm using a different solution, I may not have that natively built in, so therefore Zoom becomes a really great tool. And then there's a question about integrations, thinking about the integration from the software tool that does the meeting space to then things like scheduling and other tools like recording. We might also need webinars. So for instance, you and I are meeting one-to-one, maybe we have a maximum of 50 people on a meeting like this. But if I then need to host a webinar of hundreds of people, that's a different variation of this tool. And so you want to kind of find an ecosystem that fits the needs of your business, but also the needs of each individual team and employee. And so our job is to help people navigate that, understand the right tool, and then understand if we need to put hardware around that to enable the solution to be more intelligible, better noise reduction, whatever the case might be.
So for example, where are you right now?
So our business is based in New York City. You can probably tell I'm not there. I'm actually in Aspen, Colorado. So out here, we've got the beautiful mountains behind me and a family home behind me. And we're taking the idea of working remotely and saying certain employees that we have are capable of working remotely. How do we enable them to do that using technology?
When I think about my health of my employees, and this idea that work from home is working for the last 6 weeks, so it should continue to work. I personally don't buy that work from home is maintaining the same level of productivity, nor is it necessarily for the best health and well-being of my team. So can you help us think about how we can use technology, or how we should be thinking about using technology to achieve those goals, which is really engagement, right? Whether in a physical workspace or virtual, but also to help maintain the efficiency and productivity levels of my employees and my partners.
The question has a lot of depth to it, and I think it's a really valid concern. Healthy employees are more productive employees. Healthy employees are going to stay longer with their employer because they feel cared for. So I think taking into account that the health of an employee is multifaceted and very important to the longevity of the business is a really valid concern. I think allowing employees to work remotely, the first step is that what it says is I trust my employees. If you don't trust your employee to work remotely, you have a massive problem with company culture. So the first step is you should have employees that you do trust to work remotely. Number two, not all employees can do their jobs remotely. And I mean fundamentally, we have technicians that need to physically touch things in an office. That's hard for someone to do remotely. We have service capabilities that are remote. Well, that's easy to do remotely. The same person might actually be assigned to both tasks. So some of their job, they may need physical presence, and some of their job, they may not. My job, I can do entirely remotely, by and large, and some of our other employees cannot. So I think understanding the limitations of each job type and style is important. There's another question that's outside of the job description. So for instance, I have a person in my accounting team who could absolutely do her job remotely. She loves being in the office. She loves being around other people. To not allow her to do that would actually be degrading her mental health, not supporting it. So while we give her the option to work remotely so that she doesn't have to commute, I think to not allow her back in the office would be a problem. And so I think understanding each individual and what they're best suited for. In our company, we call your purpose your highest and best use. I also think you need to consider your highest and best use when it comes to where you work and how you work. On the efficiency side, I think it varies by employee. I think looking at the idea of not having to have commuting time is really valuable. Some employees might travel 30, 60, 90 minutes to get from wherever they live to wherever they work. Imagine if they didn't have to do that. That's 1 to 3 hours of saved lifetime that they can spend doing anything they want in their personal life. That has to contribute well to somebody's mental health and well-being. What a great work-life balance conversation. But not if the expense of it is, then they can't integrate back into the environment with fellow coworkers.
Right.
So on the other side of it, I think there's a safety question about the commute. Well, what if I didn't have to have you commuting in New York City? Might you actually be better suited to be healthy because you're not exposed to public transportation? Does that then change the employee's perspective? The other side might be childcare. Well, think about if you didn't have to drop kids off or pick them up at different times. So therefore, you'd have to then adjust by that factor of transit. So does that then enable them a better work-life balance? So I think everybody's considerations are different. And so the way that we manage our team is by looking at each individual team, and each individual team manager or lead looks and has those conversations with their given employees. And I would encourage all businesses to do the same. The next is when you have remote employees, how do you actually keep them connected? And Zoom or other soft codec tools like this are amazing ways to have FaceTime with people. And I think that's fantastic. The other is that we can't just be on Zoom calls all day, right? It's not healthy. It's not productive. There's been plenty of information about the fact that when we see ourselves on camera, we get self-conscious. We start looking at, how does my hair look? Do I look funny? And then I'm not paying attention to the meeting, right? I think the next part of this is how do we stay communicating outside of physical FaceTime, whether it's Zoom or in person. And so we as a company use a product called Slack. It allows us to communicate seamlessly, much more effective than email in terms of group communication. And it's a tool that I would never go without. Now, there are other alternatives to products like Slack, like Microsoft Teams and others. And we look at these and say they help teams function better. The other side is you need to be able to teach your employees how to work remotely, not how to do their jobs. They know how to do their jobs. That's fine. But working remotely takes a different skill set. It takes a different set of discipline. The idea about waking up at the same time, getting dressed, taking a shower, showing up to the place where you decide to work for the day and being dedicated and focused is completely different when you're at home or on the road than it is when you're sitting in the office. It just is. And so we actually taught a course to our industry called Decentralizing Your Workforce. We then turned it into an AIA or architecture accredited course that we teach to architects, and we can also teach it to businesses. And this idea about decentralizing your workforce is more than just the duties of the employee. It's about the process of working remotely, not just the software tools, but the actual lifestyle choices that are really important to make sure that you have consistency and rhythm to your behavior. And I think acknowledging that this is a real problem, when we first have everyone from our office go remote, I didn't even think about teaching the course to everybody. We then a week later got everyone on a Zoom call and realized kind of how frustrated some people were. And we said, great, let's start by teaching the course we've taught outside of our company, inside of our company, to make sure that everyone has those tools. And so I think it's really important that each of those facets is considered. And I think given how many big picture issues are happening out there in the world, it would be easy to kind of forget or miss that this is really important to do.
So if I'm a business and I've listened to your thoughts, maybe my head's spinning a little bit because I might feel like, wow, I'm really behind the curve. There's so much to be thinking about that, and I don't even know where to start, right? So how does someone engage you and Cloud9 Smart in this process?
Sure. So you can reach me at chris@cloud9smart.com, or you can visit cloud9smart.com and look at the various solutions that we offer. Our goal is to be a resource. Whether you choose to buy something from us, whether it's design and engineering services or implementation of a product or any of the other things that we do, I would say you want to have a relationship with somebody who you trust. Everyone has trusted advisors in their business. Those can come from financial perspectives, those can come from real estate perspectives, and they also need to come from a technology perspective. Our goal is the longevity of the relationships that we have with people, which then leads to the longevity of the connection they have to their business, and ideally the perpetuity of that business. And so when I think about having a conversation with somebody, let's just do that. Let's start off and figure out what resources they need. And maybe I'm actually not the right resource after we have a conversation. Maybe I need to pivot them towards somebody else who's better capable of servicing them. Well, that's fantastic. Then we did righteous by that person, and they might come back to us later when we are the right resource. And so I think that that's really valid and valuable. So I think it's really about establishing relationships and having dialogues. So we meet with a lot of executives through networking groups that we're in or relationships like you and I have, where we sit down and say, oh, I was speaking with so-and-so and they need help on such and such. And I get plenty of those questions coming my way where people are curious about something that we offer, and they just made the connection through one of our mutual relationships, and away we go.
Let's take a turn here and talk about day-to-day. And for someone who's listening, who's thinking about their current setup, here's my current setup, Chris. I'm working off of a ping pong table, okay, in my kid's playroom.
Right.
But this may go on for 6 weeks. This may go on for 3 months. This may go on for 6 months. And I want a better solution. So how should individuals think about technology and what technology specifically to use to set them up for the greatest amount of success in their WFH, right? In their work from home environment?
Sure. So by the way, you mentioned this conversation about timeline. I see this as not just a timeline for an individual like yourself or an individual like me. More of the workforce will be working remotely. This idea about digital nomads has existed for quite some time. And digital nomads are people that can do their work from anywhere. Well, actually, many businesses have the opportunity to have digital nomads. And so I see this as a fundamental shift in the world because businesses have realized that they can be efficient and because they do trust their employees and because those employees do produce for them remotely, they're going to be more likely to have more employees in that same style. So I think this question is really very valid. Because people are spending more time at home now, they're also seeing where the problems are. You're seeing the problem with your ping pong table. You might be seeing a problem with your technology solution or what we call a stack, right? The stack is not just an item, it's a series of items of technology we use together in concert to achieve the desired results that we want. And so my first question, whenever I look at anybody, is they explain something to me and I go, so how's that working for you? And natively, they will always go, well, this part's great and this part is not great. And so we just try and sit out and adjust for those things that aren't great. So a few things that are super helpful. Having a really great camera for video meetings is really helpful. Now there are solutions that are $100 to $200, and there are solutions that are $600 to $1,000 and beyond. And you can use those solutions in your home. Now, if I'm just joining someone else's meeting, I think a $100 webcam is probably fine. If I'm busy actually pitching business and I'm busy actually having and hosting my own meetings, a really comprehensive solution around the video side is immensely valuable for your ability to be present in that meeting. So I would treat those two solutions differently. Now let's talk about the audio side. Every space is different, and so these vary. The idea of wearing a headset for me is not the style that I want to be on. The idea of wearing little tiny earbuds is not the kind of world I want to be on. So that doesn't work for me, but it might work for someone else. I think there's the aesthetic consideration of it, especially because we're on video now. Then there's also the audio quality of it. So there's different audio solutions that are available, and I would look at each one of those individually in a case-by-case basis. I think we also want to be thinking about the physical space that we're in. You see that I'm sitting outside right now and able to have a meeting like this, and I'm okay with a little bit of ambient noise, and it's no problem. But in some spaces, that would not be allowed or acceptable or reasonable, and it might actually bother the person on the other side of the conversation. So this idea about working from home, I think people dedicating space to a home office, well, if you want to be a digital nomad or if you want to work from home all the time, having a dedicated office space in your home is really, really crucial. And being very comfortable in that office space is very important. When I lived in Massachusetts, I actually had a 2-bedroom condo. It was just me in the space, but I traveled all the time. But when I didn't travel, I worked from home. And having that second bedroom set up as a home office exactly to the way I wanted it to be made me more effective and more efficient. So it isn't necessarily just the technology, although that plays a part. It can also be the physical space, how quiet it is, the way it makes you feel, and the headspace you're in while you do it. Other things I would think about, this idea about decentralizing workforce and some of the rules around it. Going to work in your living room is different than going to work in a dedicated space within your home. And this idea about blurring lines is really tricky. Part of the fatigue that happens for people that are working from home is not creating a space that is work separate from home. And so, yes, you can go and do your laundry and wash dishes and do all sorts of things while you're working. But if you do that, you kind of lose that ability to really isolate and be focused. And so I think people talk about multitasking a lot. It's a fallacy. It doesn't actually work. Your brain doesn't switch like that. It takes you longer to engage back and forth from different facets of things. So if you agree with this idea, you then have to agree with providing a dedicated space. That dedicated space could be your garage. That dedicated space could be, a specific, playroom or kids room or whatever you have during the day that's okay for you. Or it could be a work from home office. But I think figuring out what that looks like in your space is really, really important. Then putting the technology in it, then suiting it to your needs in terms of simple decoration and layout and furniture, et cetera, is really, really valuable. Some people like to pace while they do this. Well, pacing is really hard to do in a house with other people in it. So maybe you want actually a standing desk that has a treadmill underneath it. right? There's all of these different strategies that are unique to each person. And I don't make any money selling a treadmill to somebody, but if that's what they want, we can provide the right desk and technology solution that works well over it. And so I think it's really about tailoring these things to people's needs. And if you have an employee who's really productive, that's going to pay back in spades. And the cost of whatever it costs to get their home office set up was going to be almost none.
For the first time office tenant, okay, now I recognize that the view is that we're going to need less space and more companies are going to be able to work remote. But for some, a physical office space will still be a need. I was hoping you could share, impart a little wisdom to the first time tenant about how they should be thinking about IT, audiovisual, and what are the first 3 questions they should be asking themselves as they embark on taking space and working in that space?
It's a great question. I would actually challenge the idea that we will need physically less space. I might even argue you need exactly the same amount of space. You'll just have less people in it, and they'll just be farther apart from each other. So I think it's really important to sit down and analyze your workforce given your particular style of business and given your employees themselves, your actual people, and understanding how many people will be in the office all the time, how many people will be in the office some of the time, and then what will your meetings look like. And you might find you need exactly the same amount of space. You're just utilizing it in a more spaced out way. So I think that's a really fair question. From a technology perspective, whenever you're moving into an office, so we see this in 2 facets. People coming from a shared workspace where they've never had to think about the associated infrastructure that's required because it was provided by shared work. And we also see it from people that are relocating from spaces, whether they're getting bigger or smaller, and their needs change. So we start from outside the building. And this is the idea about a voice and data circuit. How are you getting information in and out of your building? So this is really important. The delays on these things are 60, 90, 120 days, depending upon the building that you're in. So you need to be thinking well ahead of time. When you begin looking for space, you should be consulting with somebody about the voice and data circuits that are going to be feeding that building and the timelines required. Next part, those things are going to terminate into a place within your unit, within your suite. And then we need to distribute those via infrastructure. The idea of doing all of this wirelessly, wireless will exist in your space and it needs to be accounted for, and we can assist with that. But there will be physical wired infrastructure, and it has to happen. And the reason being is that to make the wireless reliable, we need to put most things onto wires. And when we do that, all the things on wires guaranteed to be reliable. And then we double up on our reliability wirelessly. So it's a really great solution. So we want to think about that infrastructure. And it's okay to have extra infrastructure installed that we don't use, because the cost to install it is incredibly low, but the cost to fix it after the fact, if we didn't, is really high. And so we look at value proposition and say, run a few extra wires for extra access points, even if we don't use them. Because if we then need them later, oh my gosh, the cost will be extra beyond what we thought. And then in terms of wiring for desks, sometimes people will say, well, how about I just wire one connection for a computer, and then I can daisy chain maybe off of my phone system and just have a single drop. We think that that's a massive problem, because what happens if that drop has an issue? Now the whole desk is down. So we always say run 2 wires to every desk. If you do that, you've covered computers, phone systems, both, or you have a backup if something goes wrong. Running that extra wire, nominal cost, massive savings later. Then we want to be thinking about the physical network that we're talking about. Everything runs on a network these days. So whether you have that person internally or you hire somebody like us to help you with the network, really, really crucial. Again, that wired network versus wireless network, both will work together. We want to think about them. Phone systems. Does your business run on a phone system? Most do, even if they don't use it very often. So everyone likes to have a dedicated phone. Well, do I want that phone to only work in the office? Do I want to be able to take that phone with me and carry it somewhere else, like my home? And now, literally just by plugging the phone into the network at home, when someone dials my extension, I pick it up and it works. Is that a feature that your office needs? The idea of soft phones, running that phone from your laptop or desktop, it's not exactly the same experience. And so I think it's important that people realize that, try both and understand it. Then we start thinking about things like the technology at the desk in terms of the actual computers. Who's managing that technology? Is someone actually considering how it all integrates together? So who's managing the laptops, the software that's running on those laptops or desktops, et cetera? Who's taking care of that? Then we move all of that technology into the conference room and we start thinking about voice and data. How are we being seen and heard? How are we integrating different tech spaces together? Do we have special meeting types? So an example would be we host an all hands meeting every 8 weeks. Well, where do you put all those people? And for the people that are remote who are attending that all hands meeting, how are they seeing and hearing all the people that are in the physical space? And there are interesting solutions about how to do that. Different conference room styles. So we offer packages of conference rooms and they kind of come from baby bear, mama bear, papa bear kind of stuff. And then there's the idea of divisible conference rooms. So do we have a room that actually is 2 separate rooms, A, B, and then actually a wall moves away and A and B become one space? The technology needs of these are completely different from each other, and the solutions that we put into these spaces are different. So as you're going to a tenant fit out architect and you're designing your space, what you need to do is come to a technology consultant, somebody who's tailoring the technology to your business, understands your workflows and how you operate, and then says, great, here are all the considerations we need to make. So most people will say, well, we've gone to an MEP firm and they've given us the basics about electrical and how to hang a television. And my position to that is that's a white box solution that is not tailored to your business. It may or may not fit your needs, but if it doesn't and you go and you execute that strategy, you will have misspent money. It's easier to pay for that design and engineering up front and know that you've got the right bid set so that when your GC goes out to actually execute, they're giving you the right price quote back. Number 2, sometimes, and Greg, you would be able to speak to this very well, that build out is actually done by the building. And so you as a business need to know what to ask the building for, because what you don't want is for the building to say, I gave you a concession and it wasn't what you actually wanted. And so I think from your perspective, assisting a tenant, you're going to want to pull a technology consultant in to that process so that the actual occupant knows what to ask of the person leasing the space. And so I think that there's kind of a soup to nuts approach to the tech that's really comprehensive. And from our perspective, we kind of foundationally start with the design and engineering, whether we execute it or not. And then you can put all your different subcontractors or people who are internal or external into those buckets on top of the platform. Or we can execute all those things for you or work alongside of the people that do. And so I think it's really important to understand that strategy. What's really fascinating for us is that the people responsible from the tenant's perspective, it's usually who draws short straw. Sometimes it's the CEO of the company who's that deeply involved. Sometimes it's a CFO and they're only thinking about the dollars and cents, but they're not thinking about the practical reality of how people are using space. And so they're going low bid, but that doesn't help the actual employees when they go to use the space. Sometimes it's the office manager who gets drawn into this. And she understands her world or his or her world, but doesn't understand all of the teams and how they play into this equation. And so I think it's really important that the whole company shows up and understands what they need out of that space. And it's more than just how many people fit in it and how many chairs do we need and how many monitors do we need, right? It's that gets you a part of the way there, but it does not get you all the way there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'm the first one to say, that you don't know what you don't know. So that is why it's so important to engage with experts who do this all day, every day, from somebody who negotiates the lease for you to somebody who represents you in the actual review of the lease, to someone who will do a project management to actually oversee the construction that the landlord's doing, to IT, to making sure that the technology solutions that are there are the ones that are right for your company and are the ones that you need, and that you're asking the right questions, and what other questions might you not be asking.
The trusted resource idea is really what you just hit on, and it's incredibly valuable in so many ways. Whether we're your trusted resource or not, make sure you have one. I think that's really the sentiment here. The next part is, I think, this idea about longevity of relationship. Greg, you already know that when you do righteous by one of your clients, they come back and you're there for the next one. You're there for the next iteration of them moving, taking on additional space, whatever the consideration might be. So in terms of duration of relationship, do you believe that most GCs during the build out are there with the customer for the next 10 years? No, that person's on to the next project. Not because they don't like the customer or what have you, but there's no ongoing relationship during day-to-day operations of the business.
And oh, by the way, the GC in many instances is working on behalf of the landlord. So the interests are not aligned.
Correct. So I think the idea of duty and responsibility is important. And so who's your advocate?
Right.
Our relationship with the customer is perpetual. So think about the voice and data circuit. We're responsible for the connectivity of that business to the outside world every minute of every day for the duration of the service. That means we're there whenever they need us. The same thing is true of the cabling. If there's a problem with that cabling, we have a lifetime warranty on the cabling for a good reason. We want them to be able to call us and say, I have a problem. We go, no problem, we'll take care of it. Then we sit down and we think about the technology that they use every day. I think about this in terms of return on investment for businesses. Think about how many people sit in a meeting room, or digitally or otherwise. If the technology isn't functioning, what's the cost to the business every time that happens? So we're called on by our customers consistently to make sure that everything is doing what's supposed to be doing. And that's a lifelong relationship. It's perpetual. And so our duty to the customer starts that way, but it actually has to reflect the result. So we don't want to install a solution that will cause them problems. We don't want to install a solution that will cause them to doubt the decision that they made.
Right.
So we're trying to give them the truly best solution for what they're doing every single day, because we want to be able to answer the phone confidently and know that the person on the other end isn't about to yell at us. So I think when you think about your trusted relationships, think about who owes you, who has the duty to you to make sure that this is really good for you on the receiving end. And that way you'll align with the right people.
Chris, we talked about how tenants should be thinking about their own space, but it'd be interesting to hear from you what tenants can expect to see when they enter into buildings with regards to new technologies that may be introduced.
There's an obligation for building managers, building owners, property managers to look out for the health and safety of those entering the building, both occupants and guests. And I see there's a massive opportunity around managing potential symptoms of those entering a space. And so we actually found this great product, and I'll share my screen here and share it with you. And it allows for a tablet to be on a tabletop stand, like on a front entry counter for a building, mounted to a wall or on a pole stand. And you stand within 3 feet of it, and within 1 second, touchless, it will manage and measure the temperature of the person in front of the tablet. And it does it within about a half a degree. And so we see this opportunity as a way to manage who's coming in to a space and determining if they might have a symptom that would otherwise make them not eligible to enter. Initially, it is just meant to be a tool that a security guard at a front desk could use to understand that. What they're working on now are 2 pieces of firmware updates. One that would allow it to integrate with turnstile systems. So in other words, the turnstile wouldn't be engaged if somebody didn't pass the test. You could also integrate that with an elevator. So let's say there was no turnstile, but you couldn't actually engage the elevator without doing it. The other thing that we see is the ability for it to do a record and save of the faces it has seen and the temperatures it has measured, so that if someone were found to have had an issue, you could actually go back in time, find it, and see who else might have interacted around them, almost like contact tracing. And so we see this as a huge opportunity for commercial buildings to keep their tenants safe. Let's say a commercial building doesn't enact this policy at a building level. You could enact this right outside your own door to your own suite. You could be measuring your own employees or your own guests to your own space. The other side of where this could be used is in any kind of a maintenance or utility facet. So think about all the people that are coming in through a maintenance entrance and managing all of those guests. We also see this for construction sites, in the idea about any team that's being deployed wants to be keeping all of its employees safe and guaranteeing that to its customer base. So we see this as a kind of change in technology around how people use and access spaces. And this was not on anyone's radar screen 2 months ago. So you think about the kind of ever-evolving technology landscape, what a fantastic product to assist in a time like this.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Chris, there you are. I'm going to change. I'm going to change courses for a moment. There you are. You're in Colorado, right? You've probably been there for maybe a month or so. You live in New York City. What's the thing? No episode of Greg C TV would be complete without talking a little bit about food.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you're jonesing for. What's that thing that you are just like, you know what? When I get back to New York, I gotta have.
This is where I'll probably draw boos from the crowd. I am incredibly fortunate that my girlfriend is a private chef, and we eat very, very well here. So we want for nothing. In fact, one of the nights there was a conversation around they wanted to create the miso cod from Nobu, and they literally did it, and it was amazing. And so I do not cook. I am an amazing dishwasher. And so my contribution to the group is setting the table, pouring the wine, and cleaning the dishes.
Now, if I recall, Chris, you had mentioned that your girlfriend had worked for a company where she prepared meals for families and for people week by week. Does that still exist? And is she still working for them? And here's an opportunity to talk about that company, by the way, because I thought I was fascinated by it when you shared it with me.
Sure. I'll give two recommendations, right? Two great shares. One for my girlfriend's company, which she does not own, but works for and loves it. They're called Colonistas. You can look them up on the web, CULIN, Colonistas. Anyways, you'll figure it out. So colonistas.com. And I would check them out. So what they do is they work with families and they sit down and work out menu planning for them. So people within a family might have different dietary restrictions, needs, what have you. She then goes and does all of the grocery shopping for the week, shows up with the food in the home, cooks all of the food at the residence, packages it all up and labels it, leaves it there, does all the dishes, and leaves. That service is pretty darn reasonable, if I have to say, and I think most families would benefit from being able to talk to Colonistas. The other is if you don't want to have somebody in your home, but you'd like to have delivery, because Colonistas doesn't have a commercial kitchen, they can't prepare food offsite and deliver it. So if you'd rather not have somebody cooking in your home, but you'd have food delivered, check out Newman's Kitchen. So Newman's Kitchen used to be a business that provided really high-end event catering. And with all of the things that happened around COVID, all of the event spaces went away and all of the event hosting went away. And so what Newman's did was they pivoted into doing home delivery. And so Newman's makes delicious food. We've had a number of Newman's events where I've been able to taste their product, and they've transitioned that quality level of food to delivery to the home. Wow. And I think it's really fantastic. The gentleman who owns it is Paul Newman. He's been doing this for decades. He's a really fantastic guy. He's based out in Long Island City, and he deserves your business if you choose not to use Colonistas.
Well, I'll be sure to put the links to both of those in the show notes.
Yeah, please do.
That's a nugget that I wasn't expecting to talk about, but I think sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
And Chris, I really just want to thank you for your time today. Really insightful to how we should be thinking about coming back into the office, preparation for that, preparation for our own spaces and how we can work most efficiently. And it's very clear how a technology advisory firm like yourself can play an integral role in making us more efficient. So really want to thank you for your time. Yep, really enjoyed it. For those who haven't subscribed before, make sure to hit the subscribe button below so you don't miss any future episodes. And I'm Greg Cohen from Cressa, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.